I was a drug user. Basically, when I fell away again, I became a drug dealer. And rather than just destroying my life and those closest to me, I ended up wrecking the lives of hundreds of people, if not thousands. I never had peace. I'd go on lovely holidays. I had a nice little sports car thing, and everything you could kind of want from a materialistic point of view. And yet I was frustrated, angry, and unfulfilled. Like the sense of unfulfillment I had was all-encompassing, really, because I knew what I'd had and lost, and yet I was pursuing this life of darkness. Yeah, hi, my name's Calum. I'm from a little town just outside of London. I'm here today on God's Heart TV, basically to share my testimony. It's a whole life testimony, really, so I'm going to try and condense it as much as I can. But when I was about 5, Mum and Dad's house was due for repossession, and it was to the point where bailiffs were, going to actually take possession of the property. And Mum sort of fell to her knees and said, "Look, if there's a God, please help us in this situation." And this was, in the late 80s, and basically there wasn't like the computer systems and stuff there are now. And what transpired was that somehow they managed to save the house from repossession, and from that point, Mum started following God, and she'd had a pretty rough childhood and pretty rough life, and as she started pressing into God, lots of amazing things started to happen in her life. Dad wasn't quite as receptive, so we grew up in a family that was quite polarised. So we had one parent who was really on fire for God, and then the other who wasn't, and we were sort of caught in the middle a little with that. I remember as a child really I really loved Jesus. It was on the coattails of my mum's faith, I feel, but it was no less real. I remember, like, I must have been 6 or 7. I was like praying for other kids in the school and things, and trying to like baptise them in the Holy Spirit and stuff. Not that I really knew, obviously, what that was per se, but so I had a genuine interest and a passion for Jesus at that point. But as I started to get older, the environment I was in terms of the church and things like that, and I'm not knocking the church I was in, but all I saw really as a kid was some like kind of dusty old people, not hymns and hard pews, and there wasn't really a lot of life. And I was hearing these things in the Bible, and I wasn't really seeing it played out, in real life. So as I started to get older, I remember, me and my brother would do things like I hid in a cupboard for like 8 hours one day just to avoid church, and we popped out feeling quite proud of ourselves, and it turned out it was a Saturday, so we'd spent the whole day in a cupboard trying to miss church, and it was the wrong day. So things like that. I was in church most of my sort of childhood, and then I sort of started to hit my teens, and I lived in a little village at the time, and there's a lot to be said for boredom. People often think that if you're in a life of drugs or crime, you must have like some dysfunction, or you've come from a family that was broken and things like that. And that's actually not necessarily the case. It certainly wasn't with me. I had quite a good childhood, to be fair. We didn't have much, but it was a happy time. But there just wasn't much to do. And so what we found ourselves doing really was kind of making our own entertainment, and that sort of started to involve like petty crime and things like that. We would go into the fields near behind our houses, and we'd like break into people's sheds basically and see like who could get the best thing. So it started like that, and then I ended up watching, I think it was a film. I think it was something like Gone in 60 Seconds, where they have this like crew, and they put this crew together, and they're trying to like do this heist. And I sort of got it in my head that we would do something like that. And so me and my friends got together, and we like devised this plan to basically burgle a house, which I was 13 or 14 at the time. So it boggles my mind to think that I've got a son who's nearly 10, and I was concocting these plans at such a young age. from really no negative influence I can really think of, and other than the films and stuff, I guess. So there is a lot to be said about what we watch. So at the age of, I think I was 14, going on 15, and my brother was 13, we actually burgled a house in our village. And we took like DVDs and some alcohol and things like that. And that sort of started a downward spiral, really, because it was fun, you know. We didn't really see the damage, you know, that this lifestyle was already beginning to cause people. It was just like a kind of instant gratification thing, something to do because, you know, we didn't have anything else to do. I never really struggled at school. You know, I remember, you know, all my sort of peer group was really stressing about the GCSEs, and I never revised. And I got A's and B's, and then didn't really know what to do. And I kind of fell into the sixth form, just because I hadn't really made any plans. But at this point, in my sort of life outside of school, I had started to, the old cliche, you know, I started to sort of mix with the wrong people. And again, there is a lot to be said. You know, if there's any parents watching this, I would encourage you to, without being overbearing, watch and be aware of who your children are hanging around with, even online and stuff now as well, which wasn't really a thing, you know, when I was growing up. So I started to, again, because I was after excitement, and something to stave off the boredom. Basically, I started dabbling, smoking weed, cannabis, and that. And you know, it is definitely true what they say about it being a gateway drug. You know, in my own experience, once I'd started smoking, it was very easy for me to then be introduced to some of the other drugs, some of the rave drugs, and cocaine and whatnot. So, about 14, 15, started smoking weed. And then around that lifestyle, I was hanging out in a certain estate in the town that I was at, and there was a one particular guy. I won't mention his name, but he was probably the main negative influence in my life at that time. And ironically, I actually knew him from previously because we used to go to the same church together as kids, and he'd obviously totally gone off the rails, and so had I. And then we, you know, met up again, which may or may not have been a coincidence, you know, because the devil does have schemes, you know, that he wants to, you know, use against us to try and get us off our path. So met up with this guy, and aside from the drugs, he introduced me into like stealing cars and things like that. So we'd do that, we'd steal cars a couple a week probably for a little while, and then we'd joyride and then end up, you know, just putting them in a field and setting them on fire to kind of, you know, do away with any of the evidence, fingerprints and things. And we thought this was hugely entertaining. Again, not really thinking about the cost to other people. And actually, just to emphasise that point, we were in a village and there was a party going on, and we decided we were going to rob a car, and there was a particularly old car, one of the Rover Metros next door, and so we stole this car, and there was loads of pieces of like bodywork and stuff in the back, so we just threw them in a hedge and you know, did what we did, and I think we crashed into a wall, set it on fire, and really thought nothing more of it. And a few days later, because it was the next door neighbour to the party we were at, we sort of heard the backstory, and it was actually, I think it was a 17-year-old lad's car, and he'd saved up all this money to get this vehicle, and you know, he'd bought the body parts to do it up and stuff, and you know, in one evening, in an hour, we totally destroyed that for him, and you know, apparently he burst into tears when he found out it was stolen. So I hear, and you know, now I have a conscience and a conviction over those things. I don't feel condemned, but there is a conviction to the things that I've done. Whereas before, my heart was so callous. Like, I actually think I laughed about it at that point, and it, you know, I really didn't care about anyone but myself. Actually, some of the photos here. So that's me, and this is some of my friends. My brother's back there as well. Basically, yeah, we're just like smoking up, and so that's how we were sort of knocking about. And at this point, this is how I looked which is quite different to how I look now, thank God for that. I often say that the first miracle Jesus ever performed was getting rid of that haircut. It looks like a helmet or something, man. But yeah, that's how I was knocking about for a little while. So Dad was working away a lot. He's an engineer, so he was working in Belgium for the majority of all this going on. But Mum was aware. Bizarrely, I was always pretty open and honest with Mum about it. I never really hid much from her, and to be honest with you, she was pretty on the ball. She knew what was going on. I remember the watershed when I sort of felt like I'd come out from underneath my parents' discipline, as it were. We were in the village, and some of my pals were down the way, and they asked me to come out because they had some weed and that. And Mum was like, "You are not going out, categorically. You're not going out." Shuts me in my bedroom, which is like the first story of the house, and I jump out my first story window, run off down the park and that. And that again was another watershed where I basically decided that I wasn't going to actually listen to my parents anymore. You know, and thank God, man, thank God that Mum didn't, you know, wash her hands of me and you know, just kick me out like so many of my friends, because I've got, I mean, I can't even number them on two hands. You know, the friends I had who were knocking about and doing the same kind of things I was, and their parents just had enough of them and said, you know, get out. Some of them aren't even here anymore. Some of them are homeless people, you know, in the local town. Drug addicts and stuff like that. A few of them obviously sorted themselves out, but yeah, you know, the vast majority suffered extremely because their parents basically said, enough's enough. And yeah, you know, so I owe Mum a lot, actually. And actually I would say, you know, if there's any praying mothers here, or if there's any parents whose children are wayward at the minute, don't stop praying. Mum used to drive around the estate where I was knocking about on 2, 3, 4 in the morning, knowing I was out there somewhere, praying. And I mean, this went on for like 5 years. It wasn't like an overnight thing. It wasn't a couple of weeks of madness. This was a lifestyle I was in. Fast forward, so we're doing all this stuff with robbing the cars. Obviously, Mum's just praying. She's ringing up everyone asking for prayer for me. I don't care. I'm not interested. I think I'm having a great time. I got introduced to pills, ecstasy, and cocaine. We couldn't. The age we were like 16. We didn't have a lot of money, so we predominantly used to, yeah, go to raves and things like that. Take pills. It was cheaper. So I'm probably about 13.5 stone now, about 85 kilos. At that point, I was 7.5 stone. I don't even know what that is in kilos. What, like 50 kilos or something? So I obviously wasn't eating. I was taking amphetamines and stuff all the time. So it was pretty bad, but I didn't actually think it was. But obviously, if you were to look externally at my life at that particular point, it was really bad. But I just had this screen up really, and I just thought it was a bit of a laugh. So there's an element of enjoyment in this. You know, the devil will. You know, he'll never just show you the fish hook. He puts a bit of bait on the fish hook, and then once you've eaten the bait, obviously you're hooked. So, and that can be with anything, with drugs or alcohol or, you know, power, pornography, and, you know, anything that appears to be good or enjoyable always has a caveat. You know, the devil will never give you anything without taking something else. You know, and I've found that time and time again from experience, and I think that would be the reason why I didn't actually see it for what it was at that particular point, because there was elements of enjoyment, you know, and when you're at parties and when you're at raves and things like that, and you're with all your friends, obviously that's enjoyable, but it was when my world was quiet that it was, yeah, I didn't want to think too much, so I'd end up going out again. As with everything in the world and everything that the devil offers you, it's always the law of diminishing returns. So basically what will happen is, you know, you'll do X and that will be great for a time, but then you have to do a little more and a little more and a little more. And that's with anything. And until you find yourself, you know, like some of my friends now who are heroin addicts or you know, their lives are totally blown apart. And they just started smoking weed, you know, at the skate park or whatever, and now their lives are totally destroyed by drugs, and it was a slow, gradual process. I started to get like quite bad at what are called come downs. I started to get like quite bad come downs off the pills and that. So it would be like I'd have a great night, and then the next day would just be like just felt like the world was falling on my head. You couldn't find anything enjoyable about anything. The cons started to outweigh the pros, and I started to realise, hang on a minute, yeah, I was in quite an aggressive environment, you know, with the whole drug scene and stuff like that. And so I kind of, because I was small and skinny, I started to realise that actually, like, I was at a disadvantage in some of these more sort of aggressive environments. I started to kind of realise that I didn't really want to be in the drugs lifestyle like that anymore. So I started trying to get fit, and actually what happened was I saw an army promotion or something, an army video online, I think it was, and so I sort of decided that I wanted to go to join the army. So I went down to Pirbright to do the sort of like the recruit tests, and this is kind of where I feel like God stepped in. It didn't feel like it at the time. I'd pulled myself away from the drug scene. I'd started running, I started training, I put on some weight, all for the focus of getting in the military. So when I went down to the medical test, they basically found I had a heart murmur, and they said, look, you're going to have to go and have an echocardiogram in London, and basically, you know, we'll have to go from there because it may render you ineligible for military service. So obviously I was gutted. I think actually at that point I'd even tried to stop myself smoking. I was smoking like 25 cigarettes a day at this point. I didn't have a job at this point. I'd thrown myself out of sixth form. I think I was the only person in the school to ever be expelled from the sixth form because in typical fashion at the time, I got some fireworks and I set them off over the school for some reason. So they found out about that, and I obviously got expelled for that. So basically I had to go and have an echocardiogram, and they found what it was called a mitral valve regurgitation. So basically one of the valves in my heart was letting blood back into the chamber, and I got a letter through from the military saying basically you're rendered ineligible for military service for 5 years. So my whole construct that I'd thought, you know, I hadn't been changed. Jesus hadn't stepped in and changed anything. I was just doing this purely from self-will. So I tried to stop smoking, I'd stopped the drugs and was training and things. And then obviously when I got that letter, I was like, what does it matter then? Let's just go back and just do what I was doing before. And at this point, mum had been, obviously she's in the background doing her thing, bless her. And in 2002, she'd been to SCOAN. She'd been to synagogue in Nigeria and seen some crazy stuff happen out there. And basically she said to me, this was early 2007, she said, why don't you go out to this place and get healing? And obviously I didn't believe a word of it, and I really thought it was a load of nonsense, and I was like, nah, you're all right, thanks, I think I'll be okay. And she said, well, look, me and your dad will pay for it, why don't you just go out and see what happens? And I thought, you know, what's the worst that can happen? I'll get to go out and see another country and that, and you know, experience some stuff, and I'll come back and just see what happens. It all got organised for me. I didn't really have to do anything, and this is where God used the fact that I had a mitral valve regurgitation because if I didn't have that need, I would have never considered to go. Yeah, we got to the church, and you know, I didn't have like an antenna up for anything. Personally, I didn't really believe anything. I'd seen a lot of staleness and sort of just ineffective Christianity really in my childhood. I didn't have any expectation whatsoever. I was just there really for a bit of a laugh, and just because someone else had paid for it. But when I got off the bus, you know, there was like it was a nice atmosphere. It felt, even though you're kind of in the middle of Lagos and it's loud and noisy, the church was quite peaceful, I felt. And, you know, so I was there for a few days, and obviously they didn't allow smoking in the church. So at this point I was going through a pack of cigarettes a day, and it, you know, 3 days was probably the longest time in years I hadn't smoked. And so this is where like the first kind of miraculous thing really in my life took place. I went and got one of the junior pastors or whatever. I don't even remember whether it was a woman or a man or anything really. And I just said to him, look, I need a cigarette. So someone needs to sort me out, like finding one, please. And they said, well, we don't smoke on church premises. So I said, look, I was fairly blunt about it. I said, look, if you don't find me a cigarette, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to go and find one from someone in the street. And he goes, why don't I just pray for you? You don't need to smoke anymore. And I was like, all right, mate, fine. Yeah, let's do that. And so I was thinking all the time, right, when this geezer's finished doing what he's doing, maybe I'll go and speak to one of the guards, maybe I'll see what I can do, just so I can get a cigarette. I don't even remember the prayer at all. It was probably a minute long, but it's so mad. All I know that when he stopped praying, I didn't need to smoke anymore. And so that was August 2007, and from that day to this, I've never had a cigarette since. Never smoked anything since, vapes or nothing. And it just went. And I didn't I've spoken to people and they're like, well, maybe you're hypnotized and this and that. And I mean, I didn't even know this bloke. I was not in agreement with what he was saying. I can't even remember what he was saying. All I know is after the prayer, I just didn't need to smoke again. Simple as that. And so after that, I went and sat down and I was like, right, there's something going on here because this is very strange. And so I started to kind of take notice of what was going on a little bit more in the church. And it rolled around to the prayer line. If you hadn't seen it before, it's interesting, to say the least. I mean, it was like The Exorcist, mate. Like there was people throwing up and screaming, and he was coming down the prayer line. TB Josh was coming down the prayer line, and I was like, man, I've been involved in all this madness, and these are like normal people, like bankers and like just normal people, and they're flapping around on the floor. What on earth is going to happen to me? And I sort of said to God, I was like, I really don't want to like flap around on the floor and like vomit over myself. And God's so gracious because he'll always meet you where you are. And he knew I probably couldn't handle that at that point. So the prophet, he sort of come up to me, and the way I describe it, he put his hand on my shoulder. He didn't really, I don't think he even said anything, but how I kind of describe it is like if you look at you shouldn't look at them, but if you ever see the end of a welder's torch, it's like a purple light. Basically, I didn't see it, but I kind of felt it in my chest. And I just felt so clean, man. Like, it wasn't overwhelmingly powerful or anything like that necessarily, but yeah, I just felt this like spark in me, and I just felt clean. And then he moved on, and I thought, well, I've had a touch there, so I haven't rolled around or anything, and something was different. And I remember just going to bed that night, and I just slept like, I mean, it's probably the best sleep I've ever had in that place. Like it was just so peaceful. And I woke up in the morning, and I remember from my youth trying to read the Bible, and if you've ever been in Leviticus or Numbers or something like that, I mean, it's pretty hard going. And so I was just like reading the Bible like I was like devouring it, man. Like I was reading it and it was all making sense. It just felt like the Bible had sort of come alive, really, because prior to me having the actual real encounter with the living God, as it were, it had always been like dusty religion, and it had always been faith on the coattails of mum. So when she was trying to read the Bible to me, it always kind of felt impersonal and not really relevant, and just a chore to read. It was just difficult to read. I mean, I remember reading Acts, and I was like, "What is this guy talking about?" And the transformation in my thinking and how, because the Bible, I believe, the Bible can be read as a book, or it can be read as the Word of God. And the difference is, people can read the Bible with their mind, or you can read it with your heart. And when you read it with your heart, that's when it has power, and that's when it comes alive. Because the Bible, it's a mad way of saying it, but like as you're reading the Bible reads you, kind of thing. And so that's basically what I found started to happen. As I was reading the Bible, I was in Proverbs a lot, and I was like, man, this is making so much sense. Like, and it felt so applicable to my life, whereas before it never really had. So I come back. I got picked up from the airport by my dad, and he literally thought he'd picked up the wrong bloke at the airport, because I went from, I was literally smoking a cigarette as I said goodbye to him, no doubt. And I come back, I stopped smoking through no act of will on my own. It just got taken, and I used to swear every other word, and again, it wasn't like I had to try to stop swearing. It just fell out of my vocabulary, and that's the transformation power of being with God. When you spend time with Him, and when you're in the secret place with Him, things as a natural consequence that are not of Him can't stay in the light, and they fall away. And it's not you trying to be a better person. There's a lot to be said of the difference between personal improvement, which is a man-made thing, like a humanistic thing, and being transformed by God. The only thing you have to do for that, I feel, is you just have to press in to seek relationship, and everything else comes as a byproduct of that relationship. It's not biting your lip to be better. That's what I found anyway. So yeah, like just to quantify that, I got home, Dad was perplexed, my friends were thinking I was, I mean, some of them thought it was amazing, some of them thought I was brainwashed or something, and I just didn't care, man. I was reading my Bible like all day. It was summer when I got back, and I was in a field where I lived, and I was just walking around praising God and reading the Bible and shouting and being generally quite loud. And the owner of the field come along, this quite aggressive bloke, and he sort of comes right up to me, "What are you doing in my field?" And I sort of start walking towards him with obviously a kind of crazy looking grin on my face, and I was like, "Oh, I'm just reading my Bible, mate, I'm just praying, is that all right?" And so he starts backing away and getting into his car. He's like, "Yeah, you can read your book, mate, no problem." Looking at me like I'm absolutely lost or something, and that was kind of how I found myself being in every situation, every interaction I was having with people. I could see the connection. Like, you could always bring God into the situation, whereas before I never realised that was like a thing. And it's amazing, and I know it's real and it's brilliant, but we have a part to play in this. It's not just, I feel like sometimes people think, oh, say the sinner's prayer and then you're good to go, you're sweet for the rest of your life. That's not actually how relationship works. Like, it's a day-by-day communion with God. The same as a relationship on earth, really, to be honest, in that respect. You have to maintain it, you have to, you have a part to play. It's not, you're not just passive in the situation. It says in the Bible, my people perish for lack of knowledge. And I had a real and tangible experience with the living God, and it radically transformed my life. However, there was still elements of the Christian walk that I didn't understand, and one of those specifically was grace. So what I found was I was in this place where I didn't want to sin. I didn't want to, do anything that grieved God's heart. But what I didn't understand was that His grace is sufficient. So I wasn't in conscious sin, but every time I had a thought where I felt like, it was a sinful thought, or I did something that I felt displeased God, I'd sort of chastise myself, and I'd give a certain amount of time to penance, I guess, to make myself feel better and feel that God had forgiven me. So if I had a bad thought, I'd spend, say, half an hour apologising to God. And as you can imagine, you do that sort of 5 or 6 times in a day, it can get pretty boring and quite stressful. I'd basically swapped my relationship for religion, and that is a big problem in the church today. People have swapped relationship for religion, and this is why most people walk around like dry sticks, because they haven't got the reality. They've just exchanged it for a list of do's and don'ts. And let me tell you, there is no power in a list of do's and don'ts, and it is boring. There is power, and there is just an amazing life in a relationship with Jesus. And anything outside of that really is a pale representation. And so I basically exchanged the reality for a pale representation because of what I didn't understand. I didn't understand grace. What I found was, even though I had this experience that totally transformed everything, I ended up falling back into the world. And it's mad to me to think now that even though I had the knowledge of the truth, I still managed to go back to that. And, that's more common than people think. People have a real, genuine experience of Jesus and they end up getting pulled away. And I've seen it countless times. People have an amazing encounter and they don't maintain it, or, life comes and their walk withers. And like it says in the Bible with, when your house is swept clean, and then that thing comes back and brings 7 of its friends, basically, and you're worse off than you were before. And I found that to be very true in my case. So prior to going to synagogue and having that experience, that encounter with Jesus, I was a drug user. Basically, when I fell away again, I became a drug dealer. And rather than just destroying my life and those closest to me, I ended up wrecking the lives of hundreds of people, if not thousands, over the course of time that I was involved with it. I never really took drugs again, but I become like a money man. I wanted to have finance basically, but I was earning £3,000, £4,000, £5,000 a week, and for like a 21, 22-year-old kid, that's quite a bit of change. I still knew God was real. I'd read Psalm 91 before I went to bed, like trying to protect me or something, and so I kind of knew the reality of God, and yet I was in this lifestyle, and so I had my sense of right and wrong and the truth and the lie was just warring within me all the time. And I was never down, but I was always angry. I never had peace. I'd go on lovely holidays. I had a nice little sports car thing and everything you could kind of want from a materialistic point of view. And yet I was frustrated, angry, and unfulfilled. Like the sense of unfulfillment I had was all-encompassing, really, because I knew what I'd had and lost, and yet I was pursuing this life of darkness. That lifestyle makes you a nasty person because you're dealing with people who are trying to cheat you. I had people come to my house to try and rob me. I nearly got hit in the head with a crowbar outside my own house. I had to. There was a big fight outside my house. People trying to, take advantage, and so you have to become more aggressive than the people who are also in that environment, and you can't compartmentalise your life either. So that bleeds out into every aspect. So you're aggressive with your family members, you're aggressive with your mum and dad and your girlfriend, and because you're sneaky in one area with the drugs, it just bleeds into every area of your life and just makes you generally a nasty person. So this was me in the midst of all of that. Obviously not looking very happy. I was extremely volatile, and to be honest with you, because I was never like really the biggest chap or anything, I had to overcompensate with that by just being hyper aggressive. I would let people run up a tick list basically of money they owed me, and then if they didn't owe me, I'd just run up into the house, kick the door in, just things like that, where I just used to go above and beyond to just prove that you kind of couldn't take advantage. I was incredibly angry all the time. Like I remember, and it's such a foreign feeling to me now, but I used to wake up angry. Like I didn't even know that was possible. Like I'd wake up in a rage. I think that the main feeling I felt throughout all of this was just a sense of unfulfillment, because I knew the truth and I knew God had all these promises for me and all this stuff for me to do, and how that is the ultimate expression of life, doing what God wants you to do, and that's where you find true joy, peace, and all the rest of it. And yet I'd basically sold my birthright, for effectively nothing really, and yet there was an element of enjoyment in those things, and yet it wasn't comparable to how I was feeling. Like I felt unfulfilled, frustrated and angry probably most of the time. And I think, one of the things that, especially in today's society, there's this like kind of glamour around this street life, and it's really not like that. The death, the despair, the destruction that goes with this lifestyle that's never really talked about or shown in these films, these gangster films and all of this. Like, I've got, I had a friend, we'll call him Dan. He tried heroin twice, and the second time he overdosed, and he died in a pool of his own vomit in his flat in London, and no one found him for like 20 hours. I've got another friend of mine. He's serving an 8-year stretch in jail for conspiracy to supply Class A. I know guys who are doing 20 years. There's a lot to be said about the pain and the despair behind this lifestyle, and it's very self-centered. Case in point, actually, one of the things that sticks out in my mind from those days was there was There was a guy who he was a gas engineer and he had quite a lot of money, still lived at home. He started off by buying just like a gram of cocaine a week, and that slowly progressed. I watched his habit grow, much to my, I was happy about that because I was earning more money out of him. So it started as a gram, like on a Friday night, and then it was a Friday and a Saturday, then it was a Friday, a Saturday and a Sunday, and then he started buying an 8-ball, which is 3.5 grams of whatever basically. He was buying one of those a day, 7 days a week, for months. Suddenly he just stopped answering his phone, and I let it slide for a couple of weeks, and then basically I started ringing his number, getting quite irate about it, and eventually his mum answered the phone, and I mean, it's crazy to me now how callous I was. She answered the phone and said, I'll call him James. James has basically had a psychotic episode, drug-induced psychotic episode, and he's in the local mental hospital. And I said, what's that got to do with me? He owes me X amount of money, someone needs to pay it. I said this to the mother of the child who, through my actions, had been put in a mental hospital. And I did not care. That just goes to show the level of hard-heartedness that I'd arrived at without even really trying. It was just because of the lifestyle. So this sort of carried on in a similar vein for a while, and it got to the point where, obviously, Mum, bless her, she had been over the moon when I found, when Jesus found me. And then I turned my back on him, got worse than I was before, so obviously she was a bit upset about it. I was always upfront and honest with Mum. We started getting a little bit too in your face with things, and we ended up getting raided by the police. I think my brother woke up to, I think it was 3 or 4 firearms, police officers around his bed. He got taken to the local jail. So Mum had a dream at this time, and she said, I feel like, I've had a dream, Theo's behind barbed wire, but it was like you were on a motorbike, and it was like the Great Escape, and you jumped over the barbed wire and like drove off. And I said, listen, either we're both going down or neither of us is gonna. Not a couple of weeks after that, I had a call from I think it was the lady who was in charge of the investigation, or my lawyer or someone, and basically they said, look, we're dropping the case against you because of insufficient evidence. And to this day, I don't understand how that happened, because my fingerprints must have been on all the scales, the bags, and everything else. There was no text correspondence linking me to anything in the property, but there was for Theo. And basically, it was a text message linking him, using his name, to his phone that ended up being the catalyst that got him the conviction. He ended up going up in court, and the judge presiding over his case was happened to actually specifically detest drug dealers, and he said to Theo in no uncertain terms, "You're a menace to society," and he gave him 11 months. That's him getting out of HMP Reading, and he got 11 months, and he did 3.5 on good behaviour, and then he got out on tag, on an electronic tag. And during this time, while he was in prison, he sort of found God in a big way, because he really had nothing else. And so he come out of the lifestyle, and I was still in it, and we were living together, so it was quite a sort of fractious time, really, for both of us. Prior to that, just another example of God's goodness, even in the midst of me turning my back on him. There was a time we had to go, and we had a customer who wanted something, and Theo was going to go and drop it off to him. And Theo said, do you want to come along for the drive? And I was getting my shoes on, ready to go, and without over-spiritualising it, I basically, I just kind of had a sense, don't go. There's no point in you going. So I sort of said, Theo, do you know what, I actually can't be bothered. I'll see you when you get back. And not half an hour later, I get a phone call off him, and he says, I've written off the car, I've hit a telephone pole. This was the car, and this was the passenger side door. So basically, where the passenger, like the pillion of the door was, it had been crushed in, and it was right next to Theo's head. So the police, the copper at the scene, he said, if someone had been in the passenger seat, they probably wouldn't have survived that. so that's just another sort of example of God's goodness to me, even in the midst of my disobedience. So I was carrying on with all this stuff, running on, knowing the truth, rejecting the truth, and like those two kind of moral frameworks were just basically bashing heads with me in me all the time. So it was very difficult for me. I was always frustrated, always angry, just because I knew what I should be doing and what I should be pursuing because it's right and true and real, and yet I was turning my back on it. It was actually, looking back, like an addiction, because for me an addiction is something that you are compelled to do and you don't want to do it. And I was actually reaching the point where I didn't want to be in that lifestyle, but I couldn't really see a way out of it, to be honest. I was used to the money, I was used to the influence it gave and all the rest of it. At this point I met a guy who was a pastor. He used to be an ex-heroin and crack dealer. What I liked about going to his place was there was no condescension. I never got any condescension from him or anyone in the church. A lot of people in the church, I mean, it was like something out of the book of Acts or something. There was like prostitutes in there and flipping, like drug dealers and just like what people would consider like scummy people, I guess, and we were all there, me included, we were all there, because we had tasted a tangible reality of God and we wanted to change. And I think the issue I found a lot of whenever I was dragged to church, maybe with mum or whatever, in the years this was all going on, oftentimes I felt, an air of condescension. And just to say, if anyone is in the church environment, if you're a leader in the church, or even if you're just, going to a church and someone from a background that you don't agree with, whatever that may be, and there's plenty of them, attends the church, don't look down your nose at them. Don't look at them out the corner of your eye. Treat them how Jesus would treat them, because that's effectively, Christians is little Christ-like one. We're meant to emulate Jesus. We're meant to be his hands and feet. And if you've got someone coming in the church who's coming in for a legitimate reason because they want hope, and you're giving them like a sly glance or looking down on them, it's not conducive to them and their walk. And I know this from personal experience, because actually I got quite angry with the church in general, because it just felt like, and some of those very people who were looking down their nose at me, I knew that their kids were involved in exactly the same stuff that I was involved with. And so there was an element of hypocrisy in that as well. We just need to be like Jesus. We need to show people love. It doesn't mean that we accept them like for where they are to stay there. It means that we give them the grace to come as they are and then enable them to change in an environment that's, loving, basically. And so that's what I found at this church. I mean, the hypocrisy in my life at this point is just astronomical. So I'd be in church, here I am, I know God's real, we'd be in the middle of worship, and one of my customers would be texting me like, "Oh yeah, I'm out the back, mate," and I'll be like, "Right, give me like 10 minutes, and I'll be out." So I'll be in worship, giving it Jesus or whatever, and then we go out round the back, and I'm serving people up, with whatever they're after. So I was in this parallel universe, really. I was trying to get back to God, and at the same time, this lifestyle had this hold on me, and it got to the point where the war within me was so great. I was getting I felt frazzled all the time, because I knew the truth and I was in this lifestyle and I knew they were incompatible. I basically was getting to the point where I knew that I had to make a choice, one or the other. I couldn't continue in the same vein, because it was just making me so frustrated and angry, really. And around this time, God's so good, I just felt like I needed a bit of a kick in the right direction, really. So it was quite out of the blue. I had a dream. I was outside a particular shop in my town, and there was a guy in a car. I mean, I remember all the details so clearly. He was saying to me, "Oh, you've done something, you've done X, Y, and Z to my son, you beat him up or something, or whatever else." And as I leant into the car to have an altercation with him, my phone fell into his car, and he quickly slammed the door and drove off. And as he drove off, I woke up, and I can only really describe this feeling that come over me as like abject terror. I'd never felt anything like it before, and my analytical brain, I was like, why am I feeling like this? Like, I was trying to like, that's not a nightmare, that was just like a normal dream. Like, this thing totally broadsided me, come out of the blue, and quite frankly, I had no grid for how to process it really. It was such an all-encompassing feeling that I felt like I almost couldn't function really, because it was just so heavy. And so I'm ringing Mum, she's praying for me, nothing's happening. And isn't it funny that, you know, when suddenly something bad happens, we're like, oh, you know, and we run back to God then, but like, you know, Mr. Big Bad Drug Dealer, until something bad happens, and then you're ringing your mum, trying to get her to pray for you and that, which I find quite funny now. But so I'm ringing Mum, she's praying, nothing's happening, ringing my pastor, he's praying, nothing's happening. I'm like, what on earth am I going to do? It quietened down towards the end of the day a bit, but it was still in the background, and then I fell asleep and the same thing happened. So total terror. I remember going downstairs and looking in the mirror in the bathroom, and I couldn't even, it's the weirdest thing, I couldn't even see my eyes. It was like black holes, and it was awful, man. It was terrible, and I didn't know how. It felt very hopeless, and even though it wasn't, you know, it was only 2 days, but it was awful. And so in the gym, we had an upper room where we used to let the church pray. And so I went up there, not really knowing what to do, and one of my brothers in the Lord, this guy called Marky, he started, real man of God, man, and he starts praying for me, and he's got his hand on my chest, can't remember what he's saying, he's praying, and suddenly I feel like I just want to like run out of the room. Like there's this thing in me saying, run, 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 and I'm like, I ain't going nowhere, I'm standing right here, and yeah, literally, as he's praying, this thing just stops, like, literally like turning the tap off. I didn't have to, you know, sometimes if you're fearful or you've got anxiety about something or a situation, you can kind of think, well, actually it's not that bad because X, Y, and Z. It wasn't like that. It just stopped. There was no rationalising it. It just, you know, and I was literally like on my face thanking God, man, because it was like chalk and cheese. I just went from feeling like this to feeling peace, and it was amazing. And I thought, I'm going to switch my phone off for a couple of days and, you know, not, you know, do any of the activities I was getting involved with, because I sort of wanted to thank God or something by not, you know, being a drug dealer for a couple of days. And it's weird thinking, man. But and then I turned my phone back on, obviously, and sort of just carried on, even though I'd had this horrible experience. I mean, even talking about it now, I can kind of feel the kind of the residual feeling of how that felt, because it was such a poignant thing. I was carrying on this lifestyle, and then basically I had a dream, and I was in a prison cell, and I was sitting in the middle of the jail cell, and the door opened up, and I didn't see who had opened it, but in the dream I knew it was Jesus. And I stood up, walked out of the jail cell, picked up. They give you these like little microwave trays of food. I picked it up, and I went and sat back on the chair in the middle of the cell and just carried on eating my food. And I woke up, and it was just so clear. I just knew Jesus was like, look, I'm giving you an avenue out of this. I feel like the dreams that I had where that terror was, it was almost like God was showing me, this is your life without my protection. This is your life without me holding back what you deserve. You know, I mean, that's powerful, bro. Like, even this is how much God loves us. Like, we spit in his face, I spat in his face, after knowing the truth and him setting me free from all manner of stuff, and then I literally turn around and start destroying the very people who are created in his image, turn my back on him, turn my back on my created destiny and my purpose, waste 10 years of time that could have been spent, you know, in his service or in relationship with him, I probably should say. And yet he still was so gracious to me. You know, and the thought blows me away now thinking about it, because it's just, you know, his grace and his mercy know no bounds. And yet, like, people seem to think that's a license to sin, and it's really not. It's just not a license to sin. It's a gift that we should recognise and appreciate and actually act on. So basically, I acted on it. I thought, okay, that dream's absolutely clear. I certainly don't want to be like that. No money or power or lifestyle is worth that feeling. You know, feeling how I was in those other dreams. And so I literally I just stopped. I rang up the guy who I was buying my sort of bigger amounts of stuff off, and I said, look, I'm getting out of the game really, and within the space of like a day or two, I just wound everything down. And then I got a job on a building site, and I was bumping tiles for a roofer, and it was hot, and it was, you know, I wasn't really used to working too hard. I trained at the gym, but that was like for a couple of hours a day, you know, once or twice a day or whatever. And so this was like 8 hours of hard graft for £70 a day, and you know, the devil man was just in my ear every single day, like, you're a mug. You could earn £1,000 from a phone conversation, from a phone call. You could earn £1,000, and here you are climbing up and down ladders on roofs and that for £70. And to be honest with you, it was harder. I feel like I was more tempted to go back to the lifestyle, like the drug dealing lifestyle, than I was ever to smoke again. And so, you know, that took quite a few months really to kind of unpick all of that. And eventually I started to sort of come out of that kind of mindset, really just by renewing my mind. So around the end of 2014, early 2015, a girl started training at my gym called Cara, and she ended up becoming my wife, basically. I've got a photo actually. So, picture worth 1,000 words. That's my family. So this is a testament. This is a testimony of God's goodness in my life. I've got two amazing boys. Sorry, because God's so good. Because, you know, I wouldn't have had any of this if I'd have stayed in that lifestyle. I probably wouldn't even be here, really. So I don't like it when people get emotional on these videos. I don't know, but basically, you know, when I look at this, I just see God's goodness, and we've actually got a third boy on the way due February. So, you know, God's truly blessed me, even though I didn't deserve it, you know. And actually, I do want to just say one other thing. So, if people are gonna, and this is, you know, God's blessed me with a family. He's blessed me with a business. You know, I've got a building company, and He's blessed us financially and with health and things like that. But I've seen a lot of people come to God for what they can get, rather than for them to be transformed. We're here to be transformed into His likeness. We're not here for Him to be a genie in a bottle, you know, and give me a nice house, give me a car, give me a wife, give me kids. Those things are fine, but if you're coming to Christ for those things, I'm here to tell you, you're going to probably be disappointed, because that's not what it's about. It's about relationship. And also, you know, we're never promised clear skies and glassy seas. It says that Jesus said Himself, in this life you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. So, just to use my own personal experience, for the last two years, since March 2021, my brother, who's a Christian, he's got 5 kids, he started to have trouble speaking and swallowing. And basically, we've been to really quite high up neurologists in London and things like this, and he's had EMGs, CT scans, everything, and they have no idea what's wrong with him, basically. Let me tell you, you better have a faith and not a theology when the rough times in life come. If you've got a list of do's and don'ts, if you've got a theological framework that you're kind of basing your life on, but there's no reality behind it, I'm telling you now, when something like that happens, you'll absolutely be totally shipwrecked. And you'll be like, why is God doing this to me? God doesn't give people sickness. God doesn't, He's not in the killing, stealing and destruction business. People really need to stop being mad at God for stuff, man. Like, it's so important. And not once, even with all this stuff going on, have I ever, or my mum or Theo or anyone, we've never been angry at God. We've always understood that trials happen in life. Like, I used to think probably quite erroneously that I was like a tough guy. I used to think I was, you know, whatever. But this year, really, all I realised is actually I've had a very easy life. I've never really had to deal with any trials or trauma. Yeah, okay, I was involved with drugs and things like this, but that was all my own choice. I've never had anything thrust on me where I've actually had to discover how deep my faith actually is and how I'm going to respond to these situations. And let me tell you, it's been eye-opening. And that's the journey I'm on currently. And you know, thank God I found my faith. And that's not to say that I haven't had days where sleepless nights and days wondering what's going on, but God's teaching me not to trust in the arm of flesh and to just trust Him. And so, you know, that the year's been tough, but actually the year's been a blessing because it's shown me that my faith is being refined. Just to finish, you know, if there's anyone who's watching this who is maybe enticed by that lifestyle, don't waste your time. Don't waste your time, because all that it will lead to is death and despair, man. Yeah, you might have money, you might have some influence, but it's not worth your peace. And, you know, thank God that He saved me before. I don't want to get all like chatting about heaven and hell and all this, but we need to think of it. We need to think of the eternal consequence of our actions. And, you know, for some of my friends, it's too late for them to change that. Their course has already been decided, and they're in eternity now. And and that's that on, you know, for them. So I would say as well, if there's any parents watching and your kids are going through stuff, or they're being enticed, you know, by the world, watch their friend group and stay. It's a tightrope you have to walk as a parent, I feel, and Mum did this quite well. She never write your kids off. Never write your kids off if they're going through stuff. But then you've got to walk the tightrope of not enabling their behaviour. It's a very fine line, but it is possible because I've experienced it myself. Don't stop praying. Never stop praying for your kids, man. We wouldn't even be here having this conversation if Mum had just said, "Oh, do you know what? This you know, a year in. Well, nothing's changed. I'm just, you know, I wash my hands of him." I'd be a crackhead, dead. You know, or crackhead or in jail or dead probably. You know, so it's a testimony to God's grace in my life. But we have a part to play. You know, this is why we need to pray. God's not like a puppet master. You know, like we're all marionettes just dancing to His tune. This is the reason why He tells us to pray, because actually our prayers change situations. What my whole story is kind of pointing towards is a couple of things. First of all, it's God's unmerited grace and favour. Like He's predestined us before the formation of the world, man. Like we're valuable to God. He's not like some geezer with a beard on a cloud far away. He's so intimate and personal. To each individual. You know, he would have died on the cross for us, even if it was just one person on earth. Like that's how personal this relationship can be. But we have a part to play, and that's over my whole life. If I look back and kind of, actually the main theme really is when I fell away, or when things started to go wrong in the relationship I had with God. It was never Him. It was always what I was doing or not doing. And that's not a works thing, by the way. Do you know what? The gospel message is so simple, fishermen could understand it. Yeah, like children can get it. It's not hard. Like we press into God, we spend time with Him, we're conformed to His image, and it's literally as simple as that. And then the things of the world fall away. We don't need to try and change, bite our lip to do better. And you know, it says in the Bible, if you seek me with all your heart, you will find me. And I feel like sometimes people forget that all your heart bit. Listen, like, if you had a wife, you wouldn't boast to your friends that you spend 10 minutes in the morning. Like, I spent 10 minutes with my wife this morning. Like, I had a conversation with my wife this morning. Like, but people say, "Oh, I had 15 minutes Bible time with God this morning." Like, that's a good thing. But if we're to treat Jesus as the predominant and most important relationship in our life, 15 minutes reading a Bible scripture isn't really going to cut the mustard, to be honest with you. I'm just talking from personal experience. You have to have that intimate time. You have to I can't remember the preacher who said it, but he said about like not having enough time, so he needed to spend an extra hour of time in prayer. Like that's how important we should place our time, our alone time with God. It needs to take superiority over everything else. And when we seek Him with all our heart, that's when we'll see that our lives are starting to change. And that's taken me like 12 years to figure that out. like, don't waste that. Like, take on board what I'm saying, you know, and if it's been helpful for you, and just realise that, like, we have a part to play, but all our part to play is just seeking God and just being close with him and spending time with him, and then everything else starts to happen as a result of that. And I would encourage as well, you know, like, I feel a real affinity to this ministry and to the guys running it, and I would seriously encourage, watch some of the videos, you know, that are already on the platform. There's interactive prayer, there's all sorts of things, you know, and the great thing about God's Heart TV is the fact that it's not just words, it's words with power. And that's the fundamental difference between a relationship with Jesus and a religion. So, yeah, I hope this has blessed someone, even if it's just one person. Look, I come down, I drove 3.5 hours at 5 in the morning to get here. I'm not getting paid for this, yeah? I spent 150 quid's worth of fuel to get here because I care passionately about what I'm saying. This is real, and even if it just helps like one person, I'll consider that a win, you know. So yeah, God bless.